Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is in it, but not of it. And what we're talking about is to be in our lives and experiencing the human experience while at the same time being able to have another, like a meta perspective, a bird's eye view, to be seeing ourselves in that experience. And then we get to look at who is it that's seeing the experience that we're experiencing. So it should be an interesting conversation. But before we get started, let's just take a couple minutes to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, in it, but not of it. We have the capacity to experience our lives while at the same time observing our experience. And I think this is an interesting phenomenon of consciousness, that we have this capacity for what I'll call a meta perspective, where we can sort of step back and see the bigger picture while we're also seeing ourselves in the picture. And that kind of begs the question of who are we? Who are we that is the observer? And my thinking is, at the moment anyway, is that who we are as the observer is more of our essential self. Good morning, Roslyn. Welcome. How great to have you here with us this morning. We're talking about being in it, but not of it. And who is this observer self that gets to stand back and recognize, wow, I'm experiencing all these emotions. What's going on around that? Observing the experience. And we talk a lot about identity, and we typically identify with our roles, with our emotions, with our physical expression and experience. But when we step back and have this observer role, who is that? And my current thinking is that that is more of who we truly are. The essence of us that is animating us in life. the essence of us that transcends the experience itself. So we have a part of ourselves. I don't really like the idea of breaking ourselves into parts, but sometimes it's a useful way to be thinking about our dimensions of consciousness, perhaps. So this is just experimental territory, but we have the us that is in life, reactive, engaging. And then we have maybe another level of awareness or perception that gives us a little bit more perspective, where we can be looking at our behavior and our reactivity and our interactions, and then I think that there's another dimension still that can observe the observer part of ourselves, which is kind of interesting. Like, what is that, and who is that? And it feels more like a closer to an omniscient intelligence, closer to an intelligence that is not attached, an intelligence that is witness. And as we inhabit these different levels of awareness, I think it gives us a greater ability to find compassion for the humanness that we express. And when I say humanness, I mean the reactivity, the patterns, the programming that we are subject to in so many ways. And as I think that when we have that vantage point, that broader vantage point, it lets us understand that reactivity that we witness, or that pattern behavior, isn't who we are, because there's part of us that gets to see it. There's part of us that isn't prey to that. And so the work that I do, the core connection work, the transformational coaching work, it's all guided toward freedom. And what is that freedom? To me, that freedom is ultimately the purest expression of our essence that we can achieve, without the overlays of our programmed patterning and the programmed limitations that we have, both on consciousness and our capabilities. And stepping into this place of less and less attachment, even to the way we be, provides us, I think, with a greater access to choice and the freedom to choose. Because when we're under the spell of these patterns, and they are like spells, when we're under the spell of these patterns, we are not present to our ability to choose. And when we're not present to our ability to choose, and we're in reactive mode, we're not present to our ability to create consciously. We're always creating. At least that's my premise. We're always creating, but not consciously. And conscious creation, when we're in this place of freedom, we're not, that creation, that creativity isn't being governed by the past. It's not being governed by our programmed patterns. It's not being governed by our trauma. It's not being governed by our limits, our limitations. It's actually being in a space of freedom from that place, or greater and greater freedom from that, the confines and constraints of that patterning, and able to reach into the future or be called into the future rather than driven by the past. And whatever these mechanisms of freedom are, it's worth the time and energy to invest ourselves in their discovery, to be willing to challenge the what's the word? To challenge the popular conceptions of reality. Just things that we take for granted, that we don't even realize we take for granted, like this notion of trying to create peace through war. Like, look at that paradox. Look at how really crazy that is. Like, how do we create a world that is peaceful by warring? How is it even conceivable that we could get to that kind of result? A place of peace through war or through domination and control. Like, these are just simple premises that we never even thought to question because they're so deeply ingrained. The question is, how do we wake up to these elements of crazy that have just made themselves foundational to our cultural structures? We live with these paradoxes all the time, and it is through this being in it but not of it, perhaps cultivating this broader view of our beingness without being attached to it, that allows us to recognize some of these assumptions that really make no sense. It is like the emperor has no clothes, right? To expose that wrong or sort of twisted kind of thinking. So it's interesting. Yesterday, I where this conversation's coming from is that yesterday I was experiencing a lot of emotionality. I had an upset. So Rosalind says, taking by force war doesn't work internally either for getting on the other side of one's own conflicts. All right, so I'm going to come back to what you said right now, Rosalind. I agree that trying to overpower or dominate or control ourselves by denial or judgment or punishment. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And yet that's the culture that we have grown up in, where if you do something wrong, you get punished. And we have these very clear delineations. When they are clear, we have these very clear demarcations of what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong. And when we act out in certain ways because of hurt or pain or trauma. Good morning. Good morning. Is that hi, Sue? Welcome. It's so good to have you with us this morning. So we're talking about being in it, but not of it. So when we have this broader perspective, we can see that our damaged behavior is coming from being damaged. So what sense in any way does it make to impose greater damage, punishment, judgment, harshness on that behavior when it's already coming from a place of damage? Why not be looking at how do we heal that? How do we complete that cycle? How do we dissolve that pattern rather than how do we inflict punishment for it? This idea of how do we create peace through war? It can't be done. It can't be done. So what needs to happen is that we need to transform our perspective. We need to reach into the future. We need to create the future that we dream of living in. And how do we do that? By transforming ourselves, by shifting the foundational beliefs and patterns. And one of the ways that we can do that is by releasing some of our identification with those things, to be in it but not of it, so we can see the patterns, we can observe them, and as the observer, we can then compassionately address them and interact with them to be able to dissolve them. Potentially, that's the intention: dissolve these patterns so that we have the freedom to choose. So what I was saying is that I've been processing through a lot of old emotion and trauma, upset. And yesterday was particularly emotional, like all this emotion coming up, and there was an interaction with someone that I adore that was combative, and I got to be able to stand back and look at the emotions that were roiling in me and how that turbulence impacted my communication with somebody else. And in the process of recognizing that and this conflict that arose, which got resolved, thankfully, in a beautiful way. But this conflict that arose, I could see how it really arose from me. Like my turbulence communicated into turbulence in this other relationship. And by being in it but not of it, I was experiencing all these emotions, like, and knowing that they were old, knowing that it wasn't it wasn't due to any kind of stimulus in this moment, particularly. And seeing all these different impacts that that emotion had, seeing all the dynamics of it, and kind of like this a knot of yarn that actually was starting to smooth its way into a knottedness, just watching those knots dissolve and still experiencing the emotion. The emotion was still present, as it was processing through. And we talked the other day about how things often get worse before they get better. I think that that's true with clearing old patterns, is that they become more intensified. I use the word worse. It's not necessarily worse. It's just more intense. And to be able to allow ourselves to go there, kind of, it really helps to be in it but not of it, so that we can allow ourselves to go through what we go through emotionally and all that upheaval without identifying with it, without making up a story about it, like, what's wrong with me, or I shouldn't be feeling this, that, or the other thing, or whatever stories we make up. If we can go through it, in it, but not of it, not identify with it, not make it a truth, but rather a passage, not make it, not try to fix it in time. And what I mean by that is make it static, but to allow all of that turmoil to be the unraveling that's necessary to experience that untangled thread, so to speak, and to find ourselves. We are the untangled thread in this analogy here, and the tangled up, knotted up ball of yarn is how so much of our lives are tangled up by all these other influences that we've had, and to be allowing the tangles to fall away, it can be and feel like a chaotic process. And so if we can be in it, allow ourselves to experience it, but not of it, not have to identify with it, then we can find our way through with greater grace and not beat ourselves up and not make stories about it, but allow for our vulnerability and to experience the experience without having to be the experience, without making additional meaning to it. I think that that's kind of the key to dissolving these patterns, is to recognize the pattern, see the dynamics, experience it without the story. We notice the stories because the knots are the stories, so to speak. And we can notice the stories, but we don't have to be possessed by them, if that makes sense. I'm hoping it does. So be in it, but not of it, where we experience our experience and yet don't make it mean anything more than its experience. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it's really a privilege to be able to sort of feel our way through these musings about being human. And I deeply appreciate it and appreciate you for joining in those considerations. So until next time.